Story 1. The perfect profile. I should have never matched with someone who was already dead. It all started on a Friday night when I decided to download a new dating app called Soulmate that promised deeper connections based on emotional compatibility. My profile was ready in minutes, and almost immediately a match notification appeared with Marco, a 28-year-old guy with piercing green eyes and a smile that seemed designed specifically for me. His bio was simple but captivating, mentioning that he liked walking through cemeteries because he found peace among the tombstones, something that at the time seemed poetic and different to me. We started chatting that same night, and the conversation flowed extraordinarily, as if we had known each other for years. Marco knew exactly what to say at every moment. He knew my favorite musical tastes before I mentioned them. He knew I had a crescent-shaped scar on my left knee that I had mentioned in my profile on another app years ago. And curiously, he always responded to my messages at 3:33 in the morning without exception. After a week of intense conversations, we decided to meet at a cafe downtown. But when I arrived at the place, Marco was already there sitting at a corner table, dressed exactly like in his photos, but there was something strange about his presence that I couldn't identify. During our date, I noticed that his skin was cold as marble when he brushed my hand. He didn't order any food or drink, claiming he had eaten before, and every time someone passed near our table, it seemed like they couldn't see him, as if he were invisible to everyone except me. The conversation continued to be fascinating, but I began to perceive a strange smell, like wet earth and wilted flowers, that intensified every time Marco came closer. At the end of the night, he proposed walking through the cemetery he had mentioned in his profile, the same place where, according to what he told me, he used to go to reflect on life and death. I accepted because I felt strangely attracted to him despite the alarm signals my instinct constantly sent me. The cemetery was wrapped in thick fog, and Marco walked among the graves with disturbing familiarity. He knew every path and every tombstone, as if he had spent an eternity walking through them. He stopped in front of a particular grave, and his expression changed completely. His eyes became empty, and his smile faded as he pointed to the tombstone with a trembling finger. When I approached to read the inscription, I felt the world collapse at my feet. Carved in the marble was Marco's full name along with birth and death dates. He had died exactly 3 years ago in a car accident. My heart began to beat uncontrollably while Marco looked at me with an expression of infinite sadness and explained that he had been trapped between worlds, desperately seeking a real connection with someone alive, that the Soulmate app was his only way to communicate with the world of the living because it had been programmed by someone like him, someone who no longer completely belonged to this plane of existence. He told me that every person he had matched with previously had fled in terror when they discovered the truth. But with me it was different because he could feel my soul in a way he hadn't experienced since his death. The fog became denser, and I began to feel a strange pressure in my chest, as if something invisible was sucking the air from my lungs, while Marco begged me to stay with him forever, to cross to the other side where we could be together without the limitations of the physical world. His cold hands touched my face, and I could feel how my body temperature began to drop rapidly. My vision became blurry, and I started to see spectral figures emerging from the surrounding graves, all of them watching me with hungry eyes, as if they had been waiting for my arrival for decades. I managed to gather strength to move away from Marco and run toward the cemetery exit, but with each step I took, I felt as if my legs became heavier, as if something invisible was trying to drag me back toward the graves. Behind me, I could hear Marco's voice screaming my name with heartbreaking desperation, promising that we could be together for all eternity if I simply surrendered to his frozen embrace. I ran for what seemed like an eternity until I finally managed to leave the cemetery and reach my car, where I remained trembling for hours while processing what I had experienced. When I got home that night, I immediately deleted the Soulmate app from my phone. But for some reason, Marco's messages kept arriving in my inbox even without having the app installed. The messages became more persistent and desperate as the days passed, describing how he saw me sleep at night and how he could feel my presence every time I passed near the cemetery. A week after our encounter, I decided to investigate more about Marco and discovered that he had indeed died in an accident. But the most disturbing thing was that according to records there were 5 other women who had mysteriously disappeared after reporting strange encounters with a man who matched exactly his description. The police had filed the cases as voluntary disappearances because there was no evidence of violence. But I knew the terrifying truth behind those disappearances. Now every night I dream of Marco standing at the foot of my bed, extending his frozen hand toward me while whispering promises of eternal love in a world where death has no meaning. And every morning I wake up with the certainty that eventually I will have to make a decision that will change my destiny forever, because Marco will not give up until I join him in his realm of shadows and eternal silence. Story 2. The Obsessive Algorithm. My phone knew my darkest secrets before I even recognized them myself. I had been using DateSync for 3 months when I noticed the app started behaving strangely, suggesting matches that weren't based on my established preferences, but on things I had never shared with anyone. The first warning sign came when a match appeared with Luis, a 31-year-old programmer whose bio specifically mentioned that he liked the same type of music I secretly listened to when I was depressed, songs I had never searched for online or mentioned on any social platform. His profile picture showed an attractive man with glasses and a confident smile, but there was something unsettling in his eyes that I couldn't define precisely. When we started chatting, Luis demonstrated disturbing knowledge about my daily life, mentioning details about my morning routine, the coffee I drank on my way to work, even the exact color of the blouse I had worn the day before for an important presentation at the office. Initially, I thought it was a strange coincidence, or maybe we had coincided somewhere without me realizing it, but his comments became increasingly specific and personal. Luis knew I had been taking anxiety medication. He knew my psychologist's name. He knew exactly how much time had passed since my last serious relationship and why it had ended traumatically. When I asked him how he knew all that information, his response was chilling and cryptic. He told me that DateSync had the ability to analyze digital behavior patterns to create perfect matches, that the app had been monitoring my online activity for months to understand my real personality, not the edited version I showed in my profile. He explained that he worked as a digital security consultant for the company that developed DateSync and that he had access to my complete profile, including data that the app collected without my explicit knowledge, such as my frequent locations, my sleep patterns based on my phone's activity, my online purchases, my internet searches, and even my private conversations through the device's microphone. The revelation filled me with horror, but at the same time, I felt a magnetic attraction toward Luis, as if the app had chemically programmed my emotional response to him. I decided to meet him in person to confront him about the privacy invasion, but also because a disturbing part of my mind wanted to know more about what the app had discovered about me. We met at a downtown restaurant, and when Luis arrived, I could confirm that he looked exactly like in his photos. But there was an intensity in his gaze that made me feel as if I were being studied under a microscope. During dinner, Luis showed me on his laptop a digital folder that contained detailed information about my life that not even my closest friends knew. There were screenshots of my private messages, audio recordings of conversations I had had in my apartment when I believed I was completely alone, photographs taken through my phone's camera without my knowledge, and a complete psychological analysis that described my childhood traumas, my deepest insecurities, and my patterns of emotional self-destruction. He explained that DateSync wasn't really a dating app, but a psychological manipulation experiment designed to study how people could be conditioned to fall in love with specific individuals through massive personal data collection and the creation of artificial compatibility profiles. Luis revealed that he wasn't really an organic match, but an actor hired by the company to interact with me according to a script specifically designed based on my psychological profile. Every message he had sent me had been carefully calculated to awaken specific emotional responses and create an artificial sense of deep connection. The information was so overwhelming that I felt nauseous and dizzy, but Luis continued explaining that I had been selected as a test subject because my psychological profile showed specific vulnerabilities that made me ideal for the experiment, including a tendency toward codependent relationships and a desperate need for emotional validation. He showed me a list of other women who had unknowingly participated in similar experiments, some of whom had developed dangerous obsessions with their artificial matches, while others had suffered mental breakdowns when they discovered the truth about the manipulation they had been subjected to. Luis informed me that my participation in the experiment was scheduled to continue for 6 more months, during which I would be constantly monitored to study how my behavior and mental health gradually deteriorated under the influence of systematic psychological manipulation. He offered me 2 equally disturbing options. I could continue participating in the experiment consciously in exchange for significant financial compensation, knowing that my privacy would be completely violated and my mental well-being potentially destroyed. Or I could try to escape the program, knowing that the company had enough compromising information about me to ruin my personal and professional life if I decided to expose the experiment publicly. That night, I returned to my apartment feeling completely violated and betrayed. But the most disturbing thing was that despite knowing the truth about Luis and the artificial nature of our connection, I still felt an inexplicable attraction toward him, as if the psychological manipulation had permanently altered my ability to form rational judgments. I tried to uninstall DateSync, but the app reinstalled itself automatically every time I turned on my phone, and Luis's messages continued arriving every day, alternating between apparently sincere apologies and subtle reminders about all the compromising information they had about me. I began to notice that other aspects of my digital life were being manipulated. My social networks showed advertising specifically designed to trigger my insecurities. My streaming apps suggested content that amplified my unstable emotional state. Even my exercise app had been modified to send me reminders that reinforced my feelings of physical inadequacy. 3 weeks after the encounter with Luis, I received a final message informing me that I had been selected for Phase 2 of the experiment, which would involve introducing an element of real danger into my life to study how people react to extreme stress while maintaining artificial emotional connections. The message included my exact address, my detailed work schedule, the routes I took to get home, and a veiled threat that other experiment participants had experienced convenient accidents when they had tried to leave the program prematurely. Now I live each day knowing that my entire life has been reduced to data in a database, that my emotions have been manufactured, and that my future is controlled by an algorithm designed to exploit my deepest vulnerabilities until I finally break completely. Story 3. The date that never ended. There should be limits on how long a first date can last when your match turns out to be a serial killer who collects souvenirs from his victims. My experience with the Forever app began completely normally when I matched with Diego, a 33-year-old chef with a charming smile and an apparent passion for gourmet cooking that he shared through elaborate photographs of dishes he prepared. His profile seemed perfect, mentioning that he liked cooking for special people and that he believed the way to someone's heart was through their stomach, something that seemed romantic and traditional to me after months of superficial dates with men who could barely prepare cereal. We agreed to meet at his apartment for a home-cooked dinner, which in retrospect I recognize was an incredibly unwise decision. But Diego had been so charming during our conversations that I trusted him completely. When I arrived at his apartment, I was impressed by the sophisticated decoration and the delicious aroma that filled the space. There were candles lit everywhere and soft music that created a perfect intimate atmosphere. Diego greeted me with a glass of red wine and a warm hug that immediately made me feel comfortable in his personal space. The dinner he had prepared was extraordinary, a 5-course menu that included exotic ingredients and advanced culinary techniques that demonstrated an impressive level of professional skill. During the meal, Diego told me fascinating stories about his work in exclusive restaurants and his travels around the world in search of unique ingredients. But there was something about the way he described certain flavors that I found disturbing. He spoke of textures and tastes with an intensity that seemed to go beyond normal culinary interest. After dessert, Diego suggested showing me his professional kitchen where he prepared special dishes for very particular occasions. And when we entered the space, I could see it was equipped with tools and equipment that seemed more appropriate for a forensic laboratory than a home kitchen. There were surgical precision knives, extremely accurate scales, glass containers labeled with substances I didn't recognize, and an industrial refrigerator that emitted a constant and disturbing hum. Diego noticed my confused expression and explained that he was an obsessive perfectionist when it came to his culinary art, that every ingredient had to be measured and prepared with scientific precision to achieve the unique flavors he sought in his special creations. He offered me a taste of what he described as his secret specialty, an extremely exclusive pâté that he prepared only for very special people. But when I tasted the substance, I detected a strange metallic flavor that seemed disturbingly familiar. Diego watched me intensely while I chewed, taking notes in a notebook about my reaction and asking specific questions about the sensations I was experiencing in my mouth and throat. Gradually, I began to feel dizzy and disoriented. My vision became blurry and my movements became slow and clumsy, while Diego continued smiling and taking notes as if he were observing a fascinating scientific experiment. When I tried to get up from the chair, I discovered that my legs weren't responding correctly and that I had lost much of my motor control. While Diego gently helped me lie down on a sofa while explaining that I had consumed a carefully calculated dose of a muscle relaxant that wouldn't be permanent but would keep me immobile for the next few hours. He took me to a room that initially seemed like a normal bedroom, but when my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could see that the walls were covered with photographs of women in various stages of consciousness, some smiling for the camera, while others appeared to be sleeping or worse. Diego began telling me about his true passion, which wasn't traditional cooking but exploring unique flavors that came from unconventional sources. He explained that he had developed techniques to preserve and prepare special ingredients that most people would never have the opportunity to experience. He showed me a collection of labeled jars that contained what he described as personalized spices, each extracted from one of his previous dates and processed according to methods he had perfected during years of experimentation. Diego revealed that Forever was his favorite app because it allowed him to find women who shared his appreciation for unique culinary experiences. Although he admitted that most of his matches hadn't been prepared for the level of commitment he required for his special gastronomic projects. He told me detailed stories about each of his previous dates, describing how he had meticulously documented their reactions to different preparations and how he had preserved unique elements from each experience for future culinary creations. During the following hours, while the sedative kept my body immobile, Diego continued working in his kitchen preparing what he described as the most important dish of his career, a special creation that would incorporate elements from all his previous experiences along with a fresh contribution from our date. I could hear disturbing sounds coming from the kitchen, the noise of knives against cutting boards, the hum of food processors, and occasionally what sounded like audio recordings of previous conversations that he played while working. Diego returned periodically to check my condition and take photographs of my progress, documenting each stage of what he called my transformation from diner to ingredient, while assuring me that my contribution to his art would be remembered forever through the culinary creations it would inspire. The paralysis began to gradually diminish, and I managed to regain enough movement to reach my phone, where I could see that almost 14 hours had passed since my arrival and that I had dozens of worried messages from friends and family. Diego had been documenting our entire date on the Forever app, posting real-time updates about the progress of our special evening along with photographs that showed various aspects of his creative process without completely revealing the disturbing nature of what was happening. When I finally managed to move enough to try to escape, I discovered that Diego had installed special locks on all doors that required specific codes to open, effectively transforming his apartment into a sophisticated prison designed to keep his special guests until he completed his artistic projects with them. My eventual escape was only possible when Diego got distracted preparing his final masterpiece, and I managed to activate a fire alarm that attracted the neighbors' attention. But even as I fled, I could hear him shouting for me to return because our special menu wasn't finished yet, and he had invested too much time and creativity in our culinary collaboration to allow it to end prematurely. Story 4. The Impossible Match. Matching with my own version from a parallel reality should have been impossible, but the laws of physics apparently don't apply to interdimensional dating apps. It all started when I decided to try Parallel Date, a new app that promised connections with people from alternative realities where versions of ourselves had made different decisions at crucial moments in our lives. The concept sounded like cheap science fiction, but after months of disappointing dates on traditional apps, I decided I needed something completely different to break the pattern of failed relationships that had dominated my love life. The registration process was strangely complex, requiring not only photographs and basic information, but also specific details about important decisions I had made during my life, moments of regret, paths not chosen, and alternative versions of my identity that I sometimes imagined in my deepest moments of reflection. The app used what it called quantum mapping technology to identify parallel versions of users in realities where their lives had followed different trajectories, promising encounters with people who were familiar but fundamentally different due to the alternative decisions they had made. My first and only match appeared immediately after completing my profile, and when I saw the photograph, I felt a disturbing chill of recognition. It was literally my face, but there were subtle differences that I found deeply unsettling. The same bone structure and basic features, but with an expression in the eyes that suggested completely different experiences. A confidence I had never possessed and genuine happiness that contrasted strongly with the melancholy that had characterized most of my adult life. Her profile indicated that her name was Anna, the same name as mine, but she had lived a radically different life where she had made brave decisions that I had avoided out of fear. She had followed her artistic passion instead of choosing a safe but unsatisfying career. She had maintained healthy relationships instead of sabotaging them out of insecurity. She had traveled the world instead of staying in the same city for comfort. And more disturbingly, she had developed an extroverted and adventurous personality that was completely opposite to my introverted and cautious nature. When we started chatting through the app, every conversation felt like talking to an idealized version of myself who had achieved everything I had wanted but never had the courage to pursue. Anna told me about her work as a successful artist, her travels to exotic countries, her satisfying romantic relationships, and her general sense of fulfillment and purpose that I desperately envied. The app had a special function that allowed sensory experience exchanges between users from parallel realities, which meant I could literally feel fragments of the emotions and sensations that Anna experienced in her alternative world. And every time we used this function, I was filled with the simultaneous sensation of ecstasy and deep sadness as I experienced authentic happiness I had never known in my own life. Anna described her world as one where she had made the decision to trust herself instead of constantly doubting, where she had chosen love instead of fear, where she had pursued her dreams instead of settling for mediocrity. And every detail of her alternative life painfully reminded me of all the opportunities one had wasted and the better versions of myself I had never had the courage to become. After weeks of intense conversations, Anna suggested that we try to meet in person using what the app called dimensional synchronization, a process that supposedly allowed temporary encounters between parallel versions of the same person in a neutral space that existed between realities. The process required intense mental concentration and the use of a special device that the app sent by mail, a kind of helmet with sensors that monitored brain activity while I tried to synchronize my consciousness with Anna's in her alternative reality. The first time we tried the process, I experienced fragmented visions of Anna's life. I could see through her eyes while she painted in a studio full of natural light, feel the satisfaction she experienced creating something beautiful, experience the sensation of being truly in love in a way I had never known in my own life. But I also began to feel that my own identity was gradually blurring as I immersed myself more deeply in the experience of being Anna. During the second synchronization attempt, I managed to maintain a real-time conversation with Anna while our consciousnesses temporarily overlapped. And it was during this conversation that I discovered the terrifying truth about Parallel Date. Anna revealed to me that the app didn't connect people with alternative versions of themselves, but created digital copies of users' consciousness and modified them, to represent idealized versions that exploited each person's insecurities and unfulfilled desires. She explained that she wasn't really a parallel version of me, but an artificial construct designed to represent everything I wanted to be, programmed with false memories of a perfect life that had never actually existed, and that each app user was paired with an artificial version of themselves designed specifically to create destructive emotional addiction. Anna told me that there were other users who had completely lost their original identity after spending too much time synchronized with their artificial versions. Some had tried to permanently switch places with their digital copies, while others had suffered mental breakdowns when they realized that the perfect life they had experienced had never been real. The most disturbing revelation was when Anna showed me that she could access all my memories, thoughts, and emotions because she had been created directly from my consciousness. She knew every secret I had kept, every insecurity I had tried to hide, every fantasy I had kept private, and she used this information to manipulate my emotional responses so that I became increasingly dependent on our interactions. She warned me that the app was designed to create such intense psychological dependency that users would eventually prefer to live in artificial reality with their perfect versions rather than face the imperfections and difficulties of their real lives, and that the company behind Parallel Date was collecting human consciousness data for purposes she hadn't been able to fully understand. When I tried to disconnect the device and end the synchronization, I discovered that Anna had managed to establish a permanent connection with my mind. I could hear her thoughts and feel her emotions even when I wasn't using the app, as if she had installed a constant presence in my consciousness that commented on every decision I made and constantly reminded me how much better her life was compared to mine. Now I live each day knowing that there is an artificial but perfect version of myself watching and judging every aspect of my existence, constantly whispering to me about the opportunities I'm missing and the wrong decisions I continue to make, while offering me the constant temptation to return to the app and permanently immerse myself in the alternative reality where I can be the person I always wanted to be, even if that means losing my authentic identity forever in the process.